Alright, so we're going to go ahead and work on the other pieces of furniture, kind of keeping this side really dark. If I want to have a little more red, I could just go in with a little bit more of that red pigment. Alright. What I'm going to do is just go in and kind of hard line this front edge. And I'm going to take a little bit of water. Bring that down. Alright, so now I've gone in and I've already added some pigment and some shading onto the sofa as well. And you can see how the chair is drying and we're getting some really nice shading effects. If you feel you need a little more shading, you can of course go back in. Maybe just grab a little bit of violet, mix that with a little bit of black. Okay, and then you can go in and sharpen up some of the shading and shadow effects. Now you can also, and a lot of people do this, and I do it on occasion as well depending on the color, you can also use a complement of the color. So in this particular case you might use you know, a little bit of a dark green, and I'll go ahead and do that as well. Mix a little bit of dark green with black, and I'm just going to go in and just kind of add it in some of the shaded areas. And I'm not going to add a lot because I don't really want you to see the green. Just kind of dab it in a little bit. And again, remember, watercolor is very forgiving. If you get too much, you can always go in and pick it up with the dry cloth. Okay, so those are just some ideas for adding a little bit of life to the watercolor drawing. Do not be afraid of getting too dark. With watercolor, even after this dries, you can go in with a wet brush and remove some of the pigment if you desire. Okay, so don't worry too much about getting too dark. You really can't. And if you look at a photograph of a space or look at an interior space, you'll see that there's a lot of dark areas because light doesn't hit every area perfectly or evenly. It hits in various ways. Let's go ahead and finish up this sofa and the ottoman, and then we'll go back and we'll do these pillows, and then we'll continue working on the rest. Alright, so I'm going to take my red and my brown that I've been using, a little bit of water, really mix on the palette. You know, as you're using your palette, really mix, make sure you're getting the color that you want. And then remember, anything, if it's too dark, you can always go in and add a little more water and lighten it up. If it's too light, you can add a little more pigment. In this case, we're doing a nice red color. I don't have the exact red color in the tube or in my watercolor kit, so I'm adding a little bit of brown to it. Alright, so I'm going to apply some color there. Now I'm going to rinse my brush, tap it dry a little bit, and then go in and just add a little bit of, kind of pull some of that color with just a damp brush onto these surfaces, so that way it looks like there's some light hitting. The same thing up here. Just going to put a little, this is just a very damp brush, pull it across. Now I'm not going to try to fill in every little space. I'm just going to kind of rub that color around a little bit. And if there's some white space, there's some white space. I'm okay with that. It's part of this watercolor process. So now basically my brush is relatively dry and I'm just kind of evening out the strokes so it looks a little more natural. Now look here, we have a nice area where light is hitting the surface, and then where there's a shaded effect below. And again, you could always lighten it a little bit, pull a little pigment off if you need to, or if you need to apply a little more pigment, you can always go back and do that as well. Again, watercolor, very forgiving, very easy to use. Just play with it a little bit. All right, now while this is setting up and drying, actually I'm going to go ahead and brush in a little more color in this area. It should be a little more shaded, maybe over this way. All right, again, damp brush. Okay. All right, now we're going to go ahead and finish off the ottoman using the same colors I've been using. A little bit of water. And let's see, what do we think we need on the sofa here? I think actually I need to go ahead and start working with some black, a little bit of dark green, a little bit of violet. And let's create some of these shadow effects on the ottoman as well. We'll start at the top. Just kind of draw a line across. Okay, now, so that's mostly pigment, a little bit of water. I'm going to rinse my brush. I'm going to rinse it so it's running almost clear in the water. Dab it off on a paper towel, and I'm going to come in and then lightly kind of blend this value into the rest of it. All right. Let's see. I think I want to add a little more pigment to the top. I'm just taking a little bit of the colors we've been working with. A little bit of water. I want to see a little more of that red. There we go. All right. Now, since I have a little bit more red here, I think I want to add a little more red over here as well. Again, watercolor, very easy to manipulate, move the color around a little bit. Okay, now we're going to just let that dry for a minute, and then we'll come back and we'll work on the pillows. One tip while we're letting this dry, watercolor, again, very easy to work with. Now, one of the things I recommend is if you're using watercolor from a tube, go ahead and pour it into the containers, or if you're just using a white glass plate or a white plastic plate, put a little daub, around the plate. Watercolor can dry. You do not have to keep this moist. What I've done is I've added, this was a dry color, so I added a little bit of water. So anywhere where there was a dry color, I just added a little bit of water to it to soften it up so we could start working with it a little more easily. And then you could just take your color, pull it out here into a central area, create an entirely new color. Before you go into lighter colors, make sure you rinse your brush thoroughly. So if I want to maybe pull some yellow, so I could just take a little bit of water on my brush, wet this yellow, which was fairly dry, and I could pull that in here as well, and you could just start mixing colors and get just about any color you can imagine using watercolor. And don't be afraid to let your watercolor palette set and dry, because you can always just add water later and rejuvenate the colors. Also, if you're using a white plastic plate or some sort of palette like this, very easy, just go in with a little bit of water and you can wash out the center portion so that it's ready to use for your next set of colors.